excited to have you here today. And I'm just going to introduce our two Davids.
Great, so today we have two wonderful speakers from industry. Dr. David Nace, who's the CMO of Lantern. He's had 20 years experience working with senior management, especially in large healthcare systems, payer health plans, and he's been leading healthcare providers and health information technology organizations with his strong leadership for a very long time now. And this is Dr. David Shaywitz, MD, PhD, as I've been burned on before. And he is the CMO of DNA Nexus and is an adjunct at both the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Harvard and the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. And he actually hosts a podcast called Tectonics, which all of you should check out. It's really cool.
Co-host with Lisa Singh.
Yeah, co-host. All right, so take it away.
All right, cool. So I'm going to go first. David Nace. I'm a started in family medicine, later did psychiatry, practiced occupational health. Couldn't decide what I wanted to do. And I found I liked sort of business aspect. So was involved with the first Hillary Clinton attempt at healthcare reform, which I'll speak about in terms of data. That fell apart, and the market kind of grabbed me, and I did it. I've been involved with lots of turnarounds, acquisitions, mostly with large Fortune 30 companies in a CMO role, and then more recently here with small companies. So both are very important. Because big companies exist, they rule the world, and they need to digitalize. The small companies are mostly digital native. I'm sure we'll hear about digital native. And they have a big advantage, and they also have constraints because they're not a big company, they've been around for a long while. So pros and cons for each. Digitalization is a true phenomenon as is healthcare reform, because $3 trillion has been wasted. We could do it all with $1 trillion, probably, 1.2. But data is the answer. How many people here know about data? Oh, come on. You guys are digital natives. I'm not. So I saw these little meat hands sort of going out. How many people think they know about, how many people program? Okay. How many people know what cognitive computing is? Really know what it is. Good, you're with the rest of the world. Okay, let's get started. I'm just going to briefly talk a little bit about data. I was with a company called McKesson here in San Francisco. Big company with lots of technology until they sold it all about a year ago. And McKesson really struggled with moving into population health, right? Combining financial and clinical data, learning, and we did these large, big iron population health platforms. And getting data was always a problem. Data was always a problem for big organizations. It still is. For UCSF, it's a huge problem. You want to get new types of data, put it somewhere else, and ask new questions. It costs about $3 million, and it takes about a year and a half. So how do these new companies like Google, LinkedIn, Amazon, how do they do it? I'm going to walk you through the story of why digital natives have an advantage and why big iron companies have to figure out how to digitalize in a very different way. Top down versus bottom up. So go to the next slide. So what business leaders want? Again, I'm going to speak about what the big companies said, and then David's going to talk about digital natives. Big organizations want one common view of all their customers, their patients, if you're a healthcare system, of something. But they want one common view, and they want it in real time because they have to make a decision. And they need all the data together. In fact, they need to be, give you a preview, data-centered. They need to be thinking about everything around their data. So I'll give you an example. A large Fortune 10 company that I work with, they've done lots of acquisitions, about 40, 50. Each of those acquisitions have healthcare companies, a large healthcare company. They all have healthcare clients. They had no way to look at what is all the business we have with this one client. And then many of them had patients. They had no way to look at what are all the different aspects of a patient. They had no way to do that. They're not data-centered. All the data are not only business-centered, they're application-centered. And that's the problem, because that's the history of data. Then the next slide. So the problem is the data is stuck in all these silos. If you walk around here at UCSF and talk to the IT people, they'll say, I got data over here, I got data over here, I got data over there. Can I look across it? I don't know, you could talk to our CIO. Maybe you get it into the long queue, and it's a long queue of problems where they want to integrate data and look at building a new data warehouse, building a new data mart. And maybe we'll get it on the queue if it's a high priority for UCSF, and they'll get it maybe done in 5 or 6 years. And guess what happens to all the questions you wanted to ask of that data in 5 or 6 years? They're irrelevant. Right. Exactly. So through 2017, 90% of the information assets for big data and analytic efforts will be siloed and unlevered. 90% today. you can't ask the questions you want to in businesses. Next slide. So this is the history of data. So we started out with mainframes in the 50s. Remember those big machines with the little thin, well, you probably don't remember. David and I do. You know, like little wheels that turn tape, you know. You had, everything was all programmed on one strip of tape. The data, the questions, the solutions, formulas, they were all programmed in one thing. So if you had a question, you just sent it down there and they would figure it all out and then send you an answer maybe a year later, 2 years later. Oracle grew to the size it did. Larry Ellison became, I think, the 5th or 6th richest person in the world because he determined a new way to manage data that broke it up and allowed it to be managed by anybody. All of you use it. Rows and columns. Excel. Think Excel. So when you talk about these $1 billion Endeca Oracle machines that big companies buy, it's really just really advanced Excel spreadsheets. Really, really advanced. Lots of them. Like myriads, all connected in different ways with different types of relationships. But it's been actually this huge thing. But what it did is it disconnected the data so that each individual person could actually build their own database and manage themselves just like you do with Excel. So that began to create these big data warehouses, and that's what we do today. The problem with rows and columns is you have to have a schema. And to have a schema, meaning what are going to be in the rows, what are going to be in the columns. To have a schema, you have to have data that fits within the rows and columns based on the type of data you have. So you have a schema. So you have to figure out what data you have, what questions you might ask of that, which would be your rows and columns. I'm oversimplifying, you get the idea. And then you have to normalize the data, right? It might come from different places. You can't put ABC in one and then 1, 2, 3 in another, right? You have to make it all the same type of data. Well, that takes a lot of work. So you have to extract it from wherever the data lies. You have to transform it into a normalized format. And then you have to load it into this spreadsheet, or the big $1 billion Endeca machine, right? That's called ETL, extract, transform, and load. It is the biggest business in large businesses today. And again, if you want to go make a request, you have to know what data you have, what question you might ask. It's constrained by the data that you have. Then you have to go, I want the data put together this way so I can ask this question, right? Have rows and columns in a formula. And you send that to your CIO, and that process of devising the schema, extracting and transforming and loading the data, and then loading it in there is a multi-million-dollar project. It takes time. And it goes in a long queue because everybody's got questions. By the time it gets done, it's irrelevant. This is the problem of American businesses. This is all over the world. So we move into this explosion of different types of data. We call it big data. Big data has two terms. Lots and lots of little data. 1, 2, 3s, ABCs. And then also all different types of data. You got microwave data. You got data coming out of the ICU, right, from all different waveform technologies. You've got text-written data that you're putting in your notes in the EMR. You've got typical all 1, 2, 3 ABC. And you want to look across everything. How do you do that, right? So the first place was you had to put it somewhere. How many people have heard of Hadoop? So that was a big advance because it allowed a new way that data could all be stored in one place. And then, go to the next slide. And then that began the emergence of new data technologies. The biggest issue, go back, is that there's huge volume. The velocity that data is coming at people is so fast. The variety of different types of data is exploding. The veracity, the type, and just the robustness of the data is increasing. And it's highly and increasingly varied. So that's this concept of big data. And there's ways to try to handle it. So in your world, structured data is like Excel spreadsheets. In the EMR, all the stuff you enter, that's like blood pressure, all that stuff, it's all numbers, ABC 1, 2, 3. Semi-structured data, like in a CCD or FIRE. How many people have heard of FIRE? Okay, so it's a new type of standard that helps break up the data in a conceptualized format of data that makes things faster and a little bit more flexible. I say a little bit because it's only an incremental solution. And then unstructured data, like mostly what you write in a note. Next slide. Traditional data integration is hard. This is what I was just describing. This is the world of the IT staff in any organization. This is all this ETL and different databases. I call it moving data around. That's what they do, is they just move data around. Next question. So, in the new world, data is everybody's business. I'm giving a talk in Chicago at Becker's CIO. It's all the big hospitals from around the country, the CIOs from all the countries. And they're all trying to figure out, our new businesses in healthcare is data. The next slide. So, traditionally, data sits in the applications in all the different parts of the hospital. It's fit for purpose. It's creates data that's in silos, and that's why they have to take this big approach to moving data around. That's why it's so expensive. The next architecture that they design in the data warehouse and the data centers is what drives the business and also constrains the business. Data wrangling is another term that people use. Next slide. So the question is, who's the data serving today? Is it serving the business, the department, the application? What do we want it to serve? We're going to move into a new world of healthcare, transform, try to get costs down and get quality better serve the patient, right? It's got to be patient-centered data, and the organization needs to be data-centered if they're going to run their business. Next slide. So, data strategy really begins with the data. You have to think about all these types of variable data, machine data, social media. Next slide. And then we're entering into a new world. There's also an explosion of technology. I showed you the slide about Hadoop and these new types of data technologies. Now we're also looking at new ways of computing and thinking about data. The machines are being able to read text, they're being able to rationalize and be able to make problem solving and sort of take data in, look at a pattern, and change what it's doing. That's what we call machine learning. It looks at the data that's coming through, it makes decisions, makes adjustments, and changes what it does based on that data. And that offers enormous promises. It's the world of what we call machine learning. And there's lots of buzzwords used around that, deep learning, cognitive computing, everything else. But it really is what's going to change. So it means a lot for organizations. We can shut the slides down or go to the slide for a second. So I just want to make a few comments before we do that. Just take your eyes off the slide. You're all living in the epicenter of where digital native companies started to make this transition to women. So what happened was, the folks at Google, about 12 years ago, they published a paper called Big Table. It's the first time an organization ever actually transparently said what they were working on. And what Big Table was a form of making sort of an Excel spreadsheet in a way that could explode with unlimited boundaries. Not really unlimited, but in a way. And that started the developers working across and collaborating, created this open collaborative environment for developers. And about a couple years after that, Amazon, which was really a website, wasn't the Amazon today, crashed. Do you remember that, David? Yeah. So they had a problem. They couldn't serve their clients. It's a big problem when you're a transaction business on the web and it doesn't work. That's right. People are like hitting their credit cards and nothing's transacting, or it's transacting and you're not getting your input. It's not good. So they looked at what Google was doing, and they published a paper because they took that work and advanced it and published a paper called Big Dynamo. These are the two papers that changed the world here in San Francisco, in the area, and also in the Northwest. And that began this sort of open collaboration amongst developers, these new ways, and this explosion of new technology. And as a result, we're able to now look at doing things with huge sets of data, like genomic data. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
That was a very good transition. I appreciate it. Maybe hard to sort of get, but that was an amazing introduction to this. I should have talked to you before I started this in 2014, because I figured a lot of this out over the last 3 years, and I could have figured it out in 10 minutes if I had the right conversation. Really, really good overview. I'm going to actually review the slides later because I thought there was so much there. Most people want to be able to tell the pill, but I wanted to spend just a few minutes, maybe a minute, just telling you how I got here, and then just going over some genetic stuff. And then we'll sort of take some questions, because we were forewarned by Einar what an engaged group it is, so we'll try to do our end. So I initially grew up in academic family. I figured I was going to be a physician scientist. I really, I still think it's an incredible sort of vision to be able to do that. Train internal, PhD, internal medicine, endocrine, postdoc in stem cells with Doug Melton, really like on that track. And I wound up more or less moonlighting in a VC firm in Boston. And it's something about that hearing there's a distillation of the science and the business and the applicability. I always wanted to translate the science into application. And that was a context where it seemed to be more vivid. It seemed to be sort of the distilled essence of the translational mission. something about that. And so I've been sort of around that area since. Spent a couple of years at Merck in the newly formed Department of Experimental Medicine, trying to accelerate drug development. A couple of years at a consulting company, Boston Consulting Group. We sort of offered strategy, sort of more of a top-down kind of way. About 5 years, I moved out to California in 2010. Did two things. One, mostly I was a the number of role at a company called Theravance, which is a biotech. I worked both on the commercial and on the clinical side. Led the particular clinical team, actually pivoting and then developing our HTIG product. And also I became, it's an amazing environment out here, as you probably noticed. And so to be able to just everything that's around here, and I just wanted to, I thought there's a real opportunity to combine all of the technological excitement with some real grounding in medicine, because a lot of the way people were talking about applying it didn't really reflect my understanding of the complexity of biology, the messiness of medicine, and the empathy that's sort of associated with my calling. And so I've really spent kind of my time in both of those realms. After about 5 years of Theravance in 2014, I joined DNA Nexus, which is a company I spun out at Stanford maybe 10 years ago. And then really 5 years ago started really focus. It's basically a secure and compliant cloud platform that enables enterprise users to, I haven't even got to this slide too yet, to manage all of their to manage all of their data. And I'll get to some of that in a little bit. So next slide. There we go. So what I wanted to do is just start with this super kind of cliff. Anyone do cliff notes anymore? No. No. All right. Well, there used to be these things for some of us who are lazy, where cliff notes, we're reading the book. In addition to reading the book. There you go. There you go. So basically, around the time the genome was when people started contemplating the idea of sequencing the genome, there was a period of unbelievably extravagant expectations. When the genome was sequenced, it was going to solve everything. Cindy Brenner said you can compute the organism. Wally Gilbert, who Gilbert sequencing, said we'll know what it is to be human. And it got to be such a fevered pitch of excitement, and I compelled another Harvard geneticist, Richard Lewontin, to sort of pen this famous piece in New York Review of Books saying, this is all a bit much. You guys are just like fetishizing this molecule. And of course, it's not just DNA. Next slide. We see it for DNA, for design, or for big, from anything. There's this. This could have been a far busier slide. There are a lot of things that you sort of assume sort of totemic powers, and you just start to it becomes like this worship of them, and you sort of have to step back and see how it's grounded. So initially, next slide, there was a lot of a reaction to all of this hype. People said, well, let's see the results. You've sequenced a genome, and we haven't seen, where are the results? Denny Otsiel at Mass General and I wrote a weekend review piece in the New York Times after the genome was sequenced, saying, it was more of a hopeful piece, saying hopefully people will realize the limitations of this reductionism and start to realize the importance of really doctors connecting with patients. Next slide. But then there was sort of what I call genomics 2.0. Now with NGS, which is next generation sequencing, just means you can sequence, fast and quickly. So instead of spending 13 billion to sequence one genome over 13 years, which was a genome project, 2.7 billion, now you can more or less do sequence a whole genome in under a day for $1,000. So that's an unbelievable improvement. And then there's a reaction. There's people appropriately, and I want to emphasize, this is a great thing, this degree of skepticism. Said, okay, that's great, but by the way, I think you're overstating the promise, you're overstating the achievement, and there's a huge amount of hype. And so this is an appropriate reaction that I think is important for the field to be aware of. Next slide. And so this is a Live Note slide. I guess now you can't really quote it. It's not even correct to quote Uber, but quote Uber. But basically, I do think it's an example of how you drive technology forward, where people, for the most part, forgetting the internal politics of Uber, just like in terms of ride service, get from place A to place B. It works. You don't usually, it works incredibly well. People don't use it because they have to buy into the view of technology. You don't have to do anything. You just want to get to place A to place B. It visibly works, and people like it. And I think there's a lot of, for health, in a lot of the technology, it isn't that obvious what the benefit of the technology is, or what the benefit, or what genomics really gets you. It's like everyone's collecting data, and people are like, well, what is this all for? So I'm just going to do a couple of slides that say, okay, well, I think it's really early, but there are signs of progress. So I think in terms of family planning, people are really able to make diagnosis, even for people who are at risk. People are able to make diagnosis of potentially bad mutations prenatally. Next slide. And there's a type of testing for when people are pregnant. It used to be that to assess trisomy, everyone or many people would get amniocentesis, and now many of those don't need to be done because you can more or less get enough information from a blood test that you can say, okay, it looks okay, you don't have to go to an amniocentesis. And that's one of there's been an unbelievably fast adoption of this procedure because payers like it because it's saving the money of amniocentesis. Patients like it because it's a little bit of a risk, not a risk-free procedure. It's not it's risk-free, some risk, and no one likes having a needle. And it's sort of good for everybody. For the most part. In oncology, there's been a lot of examples where being able to diagnose disease molecularly offers the possibility of targeted treatment. Next. For Mendelian disease, cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is a really remarkable example of a condition that traditionally, everyone studied, everyone knows about it, you probably know people who have it. But as a result of the molecular characterization, actually by Francis Collins at the NIH initially, and then many, many years of work, it's been able to evolve from a very, very difficult disease to a disease that still is difficult, but now there's more and more hope for treatment. There is a very effective treatment for a very obscure type of cystic fibrosis, but there are one company in particular, in association with the Vertex, that's making incredible progress on almost all of the subtypes of or the different molecular causes of it, and they really seem to have some promising drugs in the very near future. Next. Okay, so we did this one. So this is from UCSF. Any of you guys know Charles Chu? Maybe. All right. Well, anyway, so he's a professor here. He's doing this incredible work, basically taking fluid and screening it for sort of all organisms genetically, and being able to sort of find cryptic infections, and also being able to try to separate out between infectious causes and inflammatory causes. Because like on the wards, that's like the question half the time. Something's confusing, someone has a fever, and it's like, crap, this person had infection when you need to do one thing, or inflammation, they need steroids. And they have an infection, you give them steroids, you're not really helping usually. So they were able to really take this particular child who had undiagnosed infection and to identify what it was, and then we were able to actually treat it with penicillin. Next. Next. Okay, so drug development. This is actually where this is a particularly good topic, the opportunity to essentially find, to be able to use genetics as a guide for target identification. Turns out that this is an example of Dallas Hart study of a woman who had essentially a human knockout who didn't have a functional copy of a particular gene, and totally healthy, but crazy low bad cholesterol levels. And by trying to find, and as a result, it suggested that if you were able to target that particular, to make a drug against that target, PCSK9, you might be able to lower cholesterol levels, not in just a tiny group of people, but it might have broader applicability. And that's being used in a number of cases. And we're actually, so next is one of our collaborators is we collaborate between Geisinger Health System, the Swedish Health System in Middle Pennsylvania, and Regeneron to sort of help them organize and analyze these data. Then another case is sort of these rare diseases. There are these children who are born with something, and they're not, if there's something wrong, it's a horrible odyssey for the parents to try to figure out what it is. This is sort of one of these examples with Sir Bertrand Mike, his dad is Matt Mike. There was a great piece by writer Seth Moonkin in New York, and I've seen a couple of years ago, called One of a Kind, that described the ordeal of the family trying to do this, trying to identify. And ultimately they did, and he started a foundation, and now, he was a computer scientist actually who became an incredible advocate for this condition. But it was really hard, and even after they found the likely positive gene, it was even harder to find a community of people because of the data sharing issues that David was talking about. And again, one of the other things our company does, we collaborate with leaders such as Ray D. Children's in Southern California. We have a program where essentially every kid is in a NICU. Basically, if you're 3 months old, you shouldn't be in a NICU, it turns out. And if you are in a NICU, there's a high likelihood, not just something, I mean, obviously it's wrong, but a high likelihood it has a genetic cause, because that just like, why would you, it turns out that's very high numbers, and you can get a particularly high rate of diagnosis for those children, and in many cases, in the Diagnostic Odyssey, and in a couple of cases, help identify potential treatments. At a conference I was at 2 days ago, there was an example of because a child was actually diagnosed prenatally, they were able to, as sort of at risk for a heart condition, they were able to be started on propranolol when, like literally, like within minutes of being born, and avoid a whole particular sort of some bad sequelae that typically such patients experience. So it is really having an impact. And I made this sort of end here, but I think the bottom line is that, you know, this is this famous quote from William Gibson that says, the future's here, it's not evenly distributed. I think when you're in the field, you really sense that because, you know, at DNA Nexus, we work with, I mean, it's a real privilege when you're out here in Silicon Valley, it's crazy spoiled. We work with the people, you know, who are at the, for many of the people who are at the forefront. They're not only in Silicon Valley, they're not only in Boston, they're distributed, but it's some of the people who are at these places, you work with the people who are at the forefront who are really trying to do this. And then the real ambition is to robustify the processes so that both the science itself can advance and then it can be distributed to everyone. And
that was great. 2 points that you made that I thought were fabulous was the Uber thing. You know, I was talking about how digital native companies, and what I've meant by that is ones that build from the data up, thinking about the data first, right? So most of the companies that are modern they build up from the question of, we got data, how do we answer the question? And they think about problems differently than legacy organizations. They really do. And Uber's a great example. They thought about how do we got a lot of data, we get data, but how do we solve the problem of getting from A to B? Normally a business taxi cab company would say, I have a taxi, I have a car, and I want to move people, and so how do I pick people up and how do I get them? So they're thinking about what they have but constrained. They're not thinking about the data. And the data leads to a solution that never could have been thought before. And the other thing is, you know, I mentioned I did psychiatry. Well, we have a diagnostic wing, diagnostics and statistical wing. But it's true of all diseases. They're not really diseases. They're just clusters of something that's similar, diabetes and insulin resistance and sugar being abnormal. I mean, but there's probably lots of different diseases in there, and all we know about interventions is there's a signal in that messy population. It's genomics that's going to help us figure out what the true disease is.
And I think in addition, it's the genomics, it's the dense phenotyping, it's being able to sort of understand and be able to try to get to the sort of more elegant subtyping. There's certainly a huge amount of interest in doing that now in what's called de-averaging a population. And instead of saying, okay, everybody who's diabetic goes down this pathway, if you're able to figure out, well, these people benefit from this approach and these people benefit from this approach, and these people, and you know, it really, and you know, I talk about genomics, but even some of the best opportunities are unrelated to genomics. You know, in terms of behavior, there's actually, I mean, there was a UCSF presentation last year at a conference I was at, where they talked about the importance of precision behavioral modification. And basically, people have different styles that they respond to. So some people respond, I mean, this is a caricature, but they were making a point that some people respond to in a data-oriented way, other people respond in more of an emotional way, other people respond in a different kind of way. And the second part that's interesting is people's self-identification of their preferred way isn't actually as accurate as what you can get from some testing. So people don't always have the best understanding of themselves. But the point is that how I'm going to persuade you to do something might be different than what someone might persuade you or you want me to do it. And if you don't tailor your behavioral approach in an intelligent way to the person. Now, the flip side to all this is, we're all talking about technology, but if you talk to some of the best doctors, you listen to these talks and say, so you basically uninvented doctoring, and now you're reinventing it from the ground up in an incredibly awkward way. And how much, you know, this idea of, oh, patients need to have a good understanding of, you know, you should get to know your patient more. You know, the best physicians, the best care providers do that instinctively. And then so you sort of wonder how much of you almost feel like it's a crazy thing to say, okay, well, computers can do all this. Whereas at the end of the day, in many of the cases, just, you know, you really need to, you know, it's going to be the compassionate physician or caregiver that's going to invest in this.
So a point of disillusionment for all of the question is is
What a disillusionment, that's
yeah.
a first.
Well, you come into medical school, I'm gonna read all these books or footnotes, and I'm gonna walk away with knowledge so that I can treat disease. But what we've learned is probably 10% of the impact you make on health is from healthcare interventions. Only 10%, maybe another 10 or 20 from genomics. But the two biggest ones are a combination of socioeconomic and environmental. Meaning education, income, those are socioeconomic, environmental, like housing, safety in the neighborhood and stuff. And the other is behavior, which we just talked about. So, unless we do socialism, we can't really do the socioeconomic stuff. We can try to address it with social work and stuff. But the big piece, all these small companies, I'm involved with a couple in these digital companies you hear about, startups. Their only interest, they have health coaches because they're all trying to figure out how to affect behavior, how to encourage them, keep them engaged. Even the EMR companies are all trying to figure out how to develop sort of portals to engage the consumer, or if they're doing healthcare management, engage the physician to change their behaviors, because it's the behavioral part that seems to be the potential impact, and data can help us guide that. Because we like the company I'm with, Lantern, we collect data around different ways people interact, and then we try to figure out which of the behavioral setups can we do that influences their behavior. It's only 10%. Sorry.
I recently just had a conversation with someone who works data in the health tech field in San Francisco, and they told me about how there's a rising industry now on the selling of de-identified data, so that they can then get de-identified and then sold to pharma companies for development of these drugs. And so what are your thoughts on the balance between advancement of science and privacy and ownership of your own data?
So 2 points on that. The idea that anyone's interested in re-identifying it, I think that has the feel to me of an urban legend. I'm not aware of, beyond the sort of patina that pharma companies, if there's anything evil in the world, someone is ascribed to a pharma company at some point. But the idea that they're sitting around trying to re-identify data, I haven't seen, experienced, or have any. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't heard of specifically what you're saying. When I left McKesson, I went to go spend 2 years working for a year and a half for a data company. I worked just with engineers doing this sort of Silicon Valley kind of data. Because I wanted to understand, because I came from these big iron companies, Fortune 100, with all that problems I was showing you. I wanted to understand, how do these Silicon Valley companies, how do they do this? And I learned a lot. About 3 months into it, and we had done, the company I was with did a lot of work with intelligence. So when I came, about 3 months into it, I wanted to shut down my computer. I put tape over the eyes, and I wanted to just de-digitalize myself, because I realized how much was possible. It's just amazing what you can do. I know one of the things pharma companies do is they go out and look at social media sites, and they can tell anytime somebody mentions a drug and what they say about it. So that's called sentiment analysis. So they can actually look at all of the data out there on any sites, social media and other things, and they can determine trends and stuff. It's amazing how much data.
So I guess there are different ways data are used. And we can have a discussion on whether data is or data are. I'm on the data are side. But so what you're describing is sort of on the commercialization, and I guess fortunately, I spend most of my time on the R&D side. But to your exact point, there's a huge interest in, like you're describing, the use of, and I even gave an example of it, the collaboration between Geisinger and Regenera, where there's a lot of data that's collected. Now, the data that are collected in these contexts, I think what makes it critical is that data are collected with full, total, complete consent in a way that the patients clearly understand. And by the way, 23andMe does this exceptionally well. They collect the data and say, yes, it could be used, and it could be used by, and different consents work different ways, but some say, I consent for it to be used by these type of researchers, other consented for it to be used by this, and essentially, and different people have different preferences. People who are patients or people who are sick it turns out they actually want people, like they're very motivated to have people work on the data and do everything they possibly can wherever they're at. But different people are, and I think what's important is to be transparent about what's being requested, and then about respecting that and giving people a right to opt out when they want to opt out. But I don't think that, I think what the flip side of all of that, and you're absolutely right, it's an incredibly important tension. And you certainly should never be compelled to compulsorily donate your data. On the other hand, by people doing that, it allows a type of analysis and a type of insight that allows medicine and science to be advanced. And that's the type of thing that Eric Topol, for example, passionately argues at Scripps.
I was going to add, with all these things, there's pros and cons. There's way it can be misused and the way it can be used. But I think with the de-identification protocols, if you keep the original source completely silenced and you encrypt the de-identified data that's been stripped, it's really hard, I think, if not impossible, to re-identify it.
I think that it's true. I think, on the other hand, it's absolutely true that DNA, if there's anything that's distinctively identifying, it's DNA. So it is.
There's enough of a pattern there, yeah.
I was just going to ask, say you're a medical student, you have a background in programming, machine learning. Are there some specialties or areas, private sector, academia, where there are going to be more opportunities for work in big data as a physician, do you think?
I think my first answer when you said that was pretty much any. On the other hand, I am concerned about the trend. When I entered industry, I never was in the pharma industry, I mean just industry in general. There was very few people doing it, very docs. And now, I see particularly from Stanford and here, it's like they don't want to practice medicine. They just go work for a big consulting firm and then start. So I worry that we should be training people that want to take care of people. And I think, I worry that we might lose that. The business of medicine can be very contagious in a negative way.
Okay, so I'm going to offer, this is good, it's like from the left, it's
Yeah.
from the right, but
why
not
we're
quite
right
like that, yeah. So I guess I share the fundamental view that people should go to medicine, 100% to practice medicine. I actually interviewed med students, prospective med 10 years, or 7 years or something like that for the HST subcommittee at Harvard. And people are like, well, I'm excited to be able to use people's data or tissues. Like, that was a very easy one. Like, that's not the reason. I mean, I number one thing, I mean, everything could go wrong. You could wind up having to see patients, right? So, facetious, right? But I really think it's a bit of a, I think it's a false choice. I think the way I tend to see it is, I spent, I went to medicine for the exact, all the noble reasons, and I spent summer after summer, click with the pipette and oh my God, and pouring gels and westerns. I mean, so I'm not convinced that like actually looking at large amounts of data is materially worse for humanity than like clicking through wells. I think in terms of identifying some optimal career path, I think things are far more emergent than that, and I think if you're able to find something that you like, you're far more likely to be successful than if you ultimately strategize and do this and do this and do this, because there's so much random stuff that happens in life, and if you can't like, to anticipate ideas and have an idea, you can't predict where things are going to go, and if you do something that, you're actually interested, if you like seeing patients, and you're pursuing something that you actually are interested in, that seems like it'll lead to a better place than if you have some 8-dimensional model that's going to get you to the right location.
Yeah, and that's why my initial reaction was any, because medicine will become a data science. I mean, there's no question. I worry that you will lose the humanism. That's, I think the
100%,
coupling of the two is what's critical. So understanding data, and I preach this everywhere I go, is critical to the future of medicine, because it is going to be the future of medicine. But we need to not lose the humanism.
And I think that you certainly see that in grand display with Einor. I mean, you can't have somebody who really understands the value of data, value of technology, but who is such a humanist at heart.
Question?
Okay.
Oh, so I was it's kind of in
I'm
regards to this.
sorry, you go.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was just
Then you-
saying.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
You're next.
Yeah, you're all right.
So, coming from a non-healthcare background, so if you are going more on the innovation aspect of data, is there anything like you could do to bring the humanism back to data? from a non-healthcare point of view?
Same word. Like when you say from a non-health.
How does that make you feel?
So like, for example, like, I'm doing translational medicine as a graduate program, and so I'm hoping to eventually innovate new products to use data for a better, like, for that ultimate purpose. So is there a way to like design, an app or any technologies that kind of incorporates that human aspect as well?
I think the power of us as humans is in villages. So it's teams. Teams do everything. And having a team that's not all the same, having a team that's very different, coming from all different backgrounds is the key. So I like what you're asking, and I would think as you're thinking about innovation, thinking about what a problem you're trying to solve, and not what you're trying to build. That's sort of the old world thing. Think about the problem you're trying to solve, and bring together people that are from disparate backgrounds who want to solve the same problem. And I think that's the power of teams is incredible.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, so kind of a little bit more going back to what we were discussing, what you're saying with like the business aspect of I guess medical students. So for people who might be interested in doing something like a dual degree, like an MBA, do you see value in that? Just because I feel like if a lot of people want to get involved in sort of this data aspect of healthcare, a lot of times it's through like the business avenue. And I know that some people do get MBAs, but I just don't. In you guys' opinion, I want to know, like, do you think that's a valuable path to go down? And also, I have heard that there's some dangers in it, though, because with what you're commenting on, people think, like, oh, this person could go get an MBA, like a residency program director might be, like, thinking, okay, they're going to drop out of the program and just go into industry at some point.
Yeah. I used to carry 2 cards, one that said MD and one that didn't. Because people have different views and biases and stigma. I think the latter part of what you're bringing up, that happens. And that's the real world. I mean, it's the world we live in. Think about the current political environment. I mean, it is what it is, and you have to learn how to navigate it. So I see a lot of the women in the room shaking their head because I understand it's always going to be an issue. So, at least in our lifetime. So I think when I started, no docs went to get MBAs. I thought about it. In fact, I helped design a course. Now it seems like everybody does. So it's become sort of like everybody's got one. It's a lot of education. So, and the people in business school, there's some interesting things. I helped design a shortcut, like a short program. My suggestion is just do the short program, depending on what your goals are. Some people had said, take it to say I'm really serious about this, but I think a lot of what you'll learn isn't all that needed. And it's a personal decision. It depends on what your career goals are.
The joke is, it's like 6 months of education crammed into 2 years, right? So it's,
yeah.
But
Success.
but I mean, on the podcast that Lisa mentioned, we actually have interviewed a large number of people, some who did an MD MBA program, some who did an MD and then went back, like Bijan Salamaka, who went back for his MBA. And it's the people who are doing MPHs and their MPPs and finding that very valuable. I mean, I guess the answer is always sort of compared to what.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think there's sort of like a. I mean, I think the thing that's incredibly valuable, which kind of orthogonal to that question, and which thing I wish I did more of, and I think you really see a lot out here, is actually doing something in the real world. So I mean, real world, it can be a company, it can be volunteering, it can be some. It's not like a preachy thing. It's more. There's like thing that you get. I mean, I was really on this. Where you're on this, you're doing one program, then another, and you're. So I have 3 young kids, and it starts early. I mean, like there's people that are told. The kids are 5 years old. They're told to start building your CV at 5. It's insane. I mean, like our kids aren't, but I mean, you know what I mean? It's sort of. So you're on this sort of track, then you're on a track, then you have to take your courses, and then you go to med school, and then you do this, and at some point, just to sort of get off that somehow, and even just sort of experience something as it's actually existing in the real world, and not quite as an intern, because a lot of these internship experiences, they're great, but they're a little cushy, and they're not necessary. I think if you spend a year doing something, you get more of a balanced view, or more and more. But if you have some kind of real world experience, at least it gives you a perspective, oh, I really wish I had the business skills, or I wish I had, or I'm extra passionate about medicine, or I'm really glad I didn't do this. But I think it gives you a perspective that just taking classes and, learning how to, do the academic thing doesn't necessarily teach it.
I see, this is sort of a bent to your question. I see a lot of people, candidates for jobs over the past 10 years. They went to a vet school, did an internship, maybe not, for a year, and then they went to McKinsey or Accenture or Deloitte. It was a long list. Or they got an MBA, and now they're out, and I see them and I think, you never treated a patient, have you? I mean, that's sort of the react, and I've seen other people react that way too. You've not really delivered healthcare, and so you're not relevant. And because there's an army of you, so that's what the world has sort of become, and that's sort of, find what you're passionate about as an individual. I suggest get your license, practice for a while. A friend of mine, she's about 5 years out. She works half-time at Kaiser and half-time CMO of a startup company. That's a great path, because she's practicing medicine, she's learning stuff, she's learning stuff about business, in particular business she's really interested in.
That's great.
And network. Network to find find mentors, find lots of mentors. Part of my career has been just finding good people. I still do. In fact, people I've mentored probably taught me more than so that was
I see like a lot of inertia in healthcare. Like I feel like healthcare has always been like a step behind like these tech companies like Google and Apple, Microsoft and stuff like that. Do you guys have any like, I don't know, theories as to like why that happens and
Yeah, because the business of Google is clicking on ads, right? I mean, if you actually look at how they get paid, right? What is their business model? Like, what are they, at the end of the day, it's click, yeah, I mean, if you actually, I'm sure you've seen these surveys, but how much of tech is, they deliver these delightful services? I mean, I think we have all of them now, but, you know, with Alexa and the whole thing. But if it's kind of interesting when you think about it, like, the advertising model that I mean, at the end of the day, it's an incredibly elaborate way of getting you to spend time on the website and view or click on ads, right? And it's just a different standard than delivery of, you know, of care and health outcomes. So, you know, on the one hand, you know, I agree that they, you know, move fast and break things. I get all of that. On the other hand, you know, you have to have a little bit more. I agree that at least I believe you have to have a little bit more caution appropriately when it's something applying it to healthcare, because if the thing is your grandmother, like maybe you don't want to move fast and break her, you know. So it's you know, you sort of need to. But on the other hand, you can have incredible things being. I think there's a lot of truth in the fact that healthcare is incredibly conservative with a small c and is resistant to change. On the other hand, there have been so many new ideas that have not panned out. People. You know, it's a little bit, I guess, what Taleb would say is sort of, it's not the craziest thing for people to say, well, let's see if this latest shiny object is really going to be durable.
You know, it's funny, I was in a meeting this morning, and we were raising the question of, somebody in the group raised the question, well, what happens when we deliver this in a patient population that we're about ready to, that we've never done before? And I sat there saying, we don't know, that's why we're doing it. But we have to make sure that we're being cautious and we have enough safety, but we don't want to not do it. So I mean, it's part of the interesting things about doing healthcare sort of in the area of sort of this innovation with data and visual. So it's so exciting to learn. I mean, as you have, so lots to think about. I don't want to, we only got 5 more minutes.
I just want to make sure, do you guys do they have to leave at 5:45 or 1, or what's the?
They have to leave at 1.
1, okay.
Yeah.
So just one more question.
Okay.
So it looks like major corporations like, I don't know if you guys know about Amazon 1492.
I read Chrissy Farr article on it.
Yeah, so they're starting to get into the whole electronic medical records and trying to push for a more home solution. So if I'm sick, I can just talk to Alexa. How are those type of companies getting around HIPAA? How are they collecting medical records?
Okay, well, first of all, no one is, quote, getting around HIPAA, like, that's not gonna, like, that isn't, like, I'm not aware of any one business model that's, one, you know, ignore mandatory regulation, 2, you know. I mean, that's
Not a great business plan.
Not a great business model. No, but to your point, I think HIPAA is unbelievably misunderstood.
Yeah.
And basically, you have the right to do with your data what you want, including putting it on Facebook and you know, and sending and doing any number of things with it. So I think what you choose to do with your own data is, and your ability to release it or to share it however you want to, as long as you know what you're getting into, you're allowed to do a lot of that. I think I think the principle behind what you're talking about, if I understand it right, is it seems crazy that hospitals effectively seem to own your data, and it makes a huge amount of sense. You gave an Amazon example, and then I read an article on that. I've also read an article about Apple trying to do that. Basically, it would make so much more sense if everyone had easy access to your own health medical record data. You don't have to spend a lot of time like maintaining it, but you had it, and if you're in a hospital, the hospital's uploaded information, but it's your data. You keep track of it. You decide who you distribute it to. If you want to send it to someone else for analysis or do stuff, you really sort of have ownership and possession of it. That makes a huge amount of sense, and people from Jonathan Bush to David Blumenthal all sort of support the concept of doing that. And there's a lot of hope that some of these companies will sort of figure out how to crack that nut.
Yeah, the tricky part is having that responsibility, which is new for people. So it's kind of like the issue of terms of service. How many times have you clicked on a terms of service, the 14-page, and you've read it all and understood it?
There's a good South Park on that if you missed it.
So, I mean, all of these things, there's pros and cons, there's dangerous pitfalls, and there's ethical and non-ethical aspects to it all. Just have to think through.
But do you think there's an opportunity, I mean, you've been in space, I mean, you've lived this, an opportunity for patients to wind up needing, to have essentially the locus of control and ownership really?
I think that is ideal, and we have to figure out a way that allows people to be empowered that way, so it's informed. That's the key. That's the piece that I was trying to do. And I don't think we're quite there yet. Trying to figure it out.
Okay.
Thank you.